Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of Mike's Comic Shop Roadshow, Muddy Monster Comics and Sheriff of Babylon.
Well, I've been to Gotham, Wakanda, Candor, Metroport, Atlantis, Metropolis, Smallville, Xandar, Star City, Bloodhaven, Central City, Krakoa, Lightberry, Themyscira, Opal City, Asgard, Sokovia, Kempley, High Coast City, Krypton, Apocalypse, Battle Road, Keystone City, I'm a reader, I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Comic books in my hands, man. The smell of back issue pages, man. Comic shops, I've seen my share, man. I've been everywhere.
Allow me to introduce myself and give a little background. My name is Mike Atchison, and I've been a comic book reader, collector, and fan for as long as I can remember, over 45 years. I'm a member of the Campus Comics cast along with Scott Reed and Shad Schubert. This show is a spin-off of Campus Comics Cast and appears in that very same feed on Apple Podcasts and whatever podcatchers that pull from it. Now, I've been toying with the idea of a solo podcast for a couple of years, but I couldn't settle on a theme. As luck would have it, while appearing as a guest on Peter Rios's The Daily Rios podcast, we were discussing my work travels and how I like to stop into local comic shops wherever I go. Peter actually came up with the idea for this show. We even tossed around some ideas for the show's name and some interview questions, so thank you, Peter, for your inspiration and guidance. I also owe many thanks to my Campus Comics cast co-host, Shad Schubert, for recording the amazing intro music, and former co-host Dan Brown for the fantastic logo. And of course, a big thanks to Scott Reed for his assistance in adding it to the feed. So on to the premise of the show. I have a job that requires quite a bit of travel. As such, I have the opportunity to check out comic shops wherever I go, from small towns to big cities. I have always purchased something in a show of support for brick and mortar stores. While there are many options to access your comics these days, mail services, digital, I believe that the heart and soul of the industry is still comic shops. Comic shops are more than a place to buy comics. It's an experience. It's where you meet old friends and make new ones. It's the atmosphere, the comics knowledge of the employees, and it's the great conversations and debates. On each episode, I will interview shop owners, managers, or employees, learning about their store and its history. And I will buy, read, and review their recommended comic, OGN, or trade paperback. Stopping in at random comic shops can be fun and unique experiences, and it's always interesting. I'd like to think of this as my way of supporting the industry, and of course my own urge to buy comics. So please join me as I explore comic shops across the U.S. and beyond. I'd like to share the experiences with you. Okay, folks, this is Mike Atchison, and we are at Muddy Monster Comics at 1422 Walnut Street, Murphysboro, Illinois. And this is the inaugural episode of a spinoff podcast from our current feed under Campus Comics Cast that's going to specialize in interviewing comic shop owners. And I thought it would be most appropriate to start off this venture with interviewing the owner and operator of Muddy Monster Comics, which is my hometown store. So Mike Noe is the owner-operator, and I want to introduce him here. You want to say hello, Mike?
Hello, everyone.
All right, great.
And Atch.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
So it'll be pretty brief, maybe 5 minutes or so, but I wanted to start out, Mike, with just a quick history of this store, of your ownership history in this incarnation or in previous ones, you know, how long you've operated it.
Sure.
And what led you to taking over?
All right. Well, the store itself actually started life as Campus Comics over in Carbondale, as you might have noted from the name of our podcast. And it started in 1983. They're on the Strip, Illinois Avenue, across from the university. And Dennis McCord founded it back then. It was like 3 businesses crammed together in a very small space between J&J Coins, Book World, and actually Dennis just started out with a couple of racks, you know, where he sold comics off of the racks there. And I got involved. Well, I was a customer for a long time, and then I started getting back into my childhood hobby of, well, first of all, the comic that got me back into coming in and buying comics was Kingdom Come. by Alex Ross, and was that Mark
Wade?
Mark Wade, yes. And Alex Ross, and that got me back into it. And then I got into my childhood hobby again of building and painting figure model kits. And Dennis always liked to see that stuff, and I would build it and bring it in. And through that, we just developed a friendship, you know, and as well as being his customer. And then about the year 2000, I started running a online business and hobby shop through Campus Comics, and he let me just kind of piggyback on his orders and everything else. And that's how I got involved with the store, and it just became natural. Then I knew all the customers and knew everybody, Hatch included, so many people, you know, for so many years. And around 2016, Dennis retired, and I just took over. Just the natural progression of things. Yeah. You know, was that. And then due to some issues that came up and everything, I just decided to move the store closer to the town where I lived, which is Murphysboro. Well, actually in the town, not closer to it. So just for ease of convenience for me. And with that point, we'd already moved off the strip. So Campus Comics already made not a lot of sense because we weren't close to campus. And then by the time I moved to the next town over, it really didn't make any sense. You know what I mean? So that's why I changed the name of the store to our hometown cryptid creature, which is right in line with my other interests, you know, which is the Big Muddy Monster. And I just thought that was a little wordy, so I just changed it to Muddy Monster Comics.
Right. And Big Muddy being the river that actually runs through Murphysboro.
Correct. Yeah, it runs outside, and it's usually along the banks of that river where the creature's seen. Yeah. So,
and that's a perfect segue into my next question is about how would you describe your shop? What, you know, as in what do you specialize in besides comics, of course?
Gotcha.
Any particular themes?
As I alluded to, you know, monsters. I love classic monsters. I'm sitting here wearing a Universal Monster shirt. And that was, again, more probably what I cut my teeth on in the geek culture world, even more than comic books, was the monster stuff growing up. Yeah. Child of the 60s, you know, the monster kid generation where everything was monsters. Right. And then just so to have our own monster, and then we sell a lot of monster-based merchandise. A lot of the model kits, like I mentioned, was my first love and everything. And deal with a lot of that stuff and hopefully expanding into that and actually shooting to become the Big Muddy Monster Museum, kind of a touch point for all things Big Muddy Monster here in town.
Right. That's great. This next question is sort of more of a personal question, and that is, well, not super personal, but you know, do you have a favorite comic series or a favorite comic character?
Well, I guess it sounds kind of lame, but I was always a default to Batman. You know what I mean? Always a little bit more. I loved them all. I never really collected. I was a pretty casual reader, you know, because just basically due to geography of where I grew up, I didn't have like a lot of easy access to comics. So basically I'd get comics whenever my dad would take me to town or something like that. And that would be about it. We lived just a couple miles outside of town, so it wasn't like jump on the bike and go. It was out the highway, you know.
Well, I can relate to that very well. Yeah.
So it's Batman. You know, the stuff that I have read and enjoyed the most always tended to end up being Batman.
All right. Yeah. Well, you know, it's. I'd say you're in good company. With that.
Yeah, like I said, Batman I know that's pretty rote. You know what I mean? Nothing surprising there.
Yeah, well, it's good though. Okay, so if you had to kind of sum it up a little bit in a few words, why should folks visit your store in particular?
Well, I really feel like we've kind of got some. Well, one of the things that we try to avoid here is any kind of, unfortunately, comic book shop snobbery can be a thing, you know, whereas if people walk in, oh, you don't know about this or this, you know, whatever. Like we really try to avoid that. We talk to anybody. We try to recommend stuff to anybody. We try to make everybody feel welcome. And we realize that not everybody's into comics, and people aren't going to wake up one day when they're 40 years old and decide they're going to start reading comics. It's either something you did or something you didn't do. So we just try to give people a lot of, I guess, eye candy, to look at as far as comic stuff to look at, stuff on the walls. We sell posters, the monster stuff, just trying to, to appeal to a wide array to people, people. And we try to be kid friendly. I don't really, tolerate, after the store's open and people in that, we don't really tolerate a lot of, adult language and stuff like, we try to make a family oriented thing.
And it is, the visual appeal of your store is very evident. I mean, whether it be comic book related, movie related, or Universal Monsters related, right? You can get a lot of enjoyment here just by browsing. And,
we get a lot of that. I remember this when I was a kid. You know what I mean? That's the thing about comics and a lot of what we do. Anybody in this industry or anything related, it's very nostalgia driven. And you kind of hit people in the feels and in their childhood and stuff like that. And that's what we really want to try to do, is just kind of give people a little bit of a window back into a simpler time, maybe, kind of thing. Okay.
So, special events. Do you ever hold any here? If so, do you have creators? How does that work?
Southern Illinois here, it's odd, as far as being such a rural area. It's a surprising amount of talent. Not that there's a surprising amount of talent, but the fact that there is a surprising amount of local artists that have been published, to one degree or another, either by small publishers or got a couple, Joey Dodd and Justin Holman, who have both been, our artwork has been both been published by Marvel and DC or DC, as well as things like Grimm's Fairy Tales, Zenoscope, stuff like that, So those guys are in the area. We do tend to have, we do usually have a comic convention, Muddy Monster Comics Con. We've had it in July the last couple of years. We hope to continue that. And for some reason, we've really lucked into the fact that we've gotten phone calls the last couple of years from Power Ranger actors that want to make store appearances, and then we'll usually build an event around that.
Yeah.
So.
That's great. Well, that brings us to the last question, which is sort of important because it's going to lead into the second segment of this particular type of episode, and that is recommended reading. So Mike's already made a recommendation to me of an OGN to read, and I'll let Mike maybe describe it.
All right. Well, what it is it's called The Sheriff of Babylon by Tom King. I think most people are familiar with Tom King through his pretty lengthy run of Batman, here during the New 52. What's this?
The Rebirth?
Rebirth. Yeah, thank you. I was totally blanking on that. It was Rebirth, which was well-timed because Rebirth started the week that I took over the store. So it was like a rebirth from the store, and it was a rebirth.
That's a good point.
For DC Comics. And it's written by Tom King. And The Sheriff of Babylon, what it is, I'm not sure if people are aware of Tom King and his history, but he was a CIA operative. And what he did is he actually worked in the law enforcement side over in, the Middle Eastern areas during a lot of that stuff. So it's a lot of told from his perspective as a CIA operative, and as far as fighting a pretty notable drug cartel over in that area. And it's just based on his own experience of that. And he's just a really good writer. You know what I mean? So then be able to put that stuff into it, put his own spin, his own knowledge, his own insights into that kind of thing. It's pretty compelling. Yeah. So I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, when you mentioned that one, I thought, well, that's one I have not read, and I'm a big Tom King fan. Mitch Gerard's is his longtime collaborator, also. So I'm very excited to read this,
and not something superhero from him,
right?
From a little
off the beaten path, right?
For him,
yeah. So once again, and Mike, I want to thank you, Mike Noe here. It's been great interviewing you, and of course, this is. Our little open secret is that we've been knowing each other for a long time, so it's a great way for us to test this format out.
Sure.
And I'll be reading this, and then I'll do a synopsis and review that'll be in the second segment of this podcast. So thanks again, Mike.
Thank you again.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye. Okay, the featured comic shop in this first episode is my and Scott and Shad's very own hometown shop, Muddy Monster Comics, located at 1422 Walnut Street in Murphysboro, Illinois. And since it was too much fun to avoid, I'm joined by my esteemed compadres. Guys, introduce yourselves.
Shad Schubert.
It's Scott Reed.
All right. And it's been a few weeks since that interview with Mike Noe at Muddy Monster Comics. And we have all three read his recommended book, Sheriff of Babylon. Now, these episodes are going to be full of spoilers. So if any of the listeners are wanting to read along with us, please do that first. Come back later to listen if you like. It's at your peril, whatever you like to do. All right, so let's jump right in. So Sheriff of Babylon is written and drawn by the Eisner Award-winning pair of Tom King and Mitch Gerrits, which I actually, I think I've mispronounced his word for a long time now, but I looked online and found a video interview with him, and that's how it's pronounced. He did the cover art, or the cover art for all 12 issues was done by the late John Paul Leon. It was originally published in 12 individual issues from 2015 to 2017 under the Vertigo imprint at DC. The 2021 cover is the one, or soft cover is the one I bought at Muddy Monster Comics, and it collects all 12 of the issues. Quick interesting point of note is that it was initially solicited in 2015 as the Sheriff of Baghdad, not Babylon, but it was discovered that that name was used by a retired sergeant major named John McPhee, who basically does tactical training and gives lectures and things. So an issue by issue synopsis of a 294-page story would make for a very long podcast. So we're going to condense it as much as possible. And one last note is this story is inspired by Tom King's experiences in Iraq while working as a counterterrorism officer for the CIA in 2004. So we're going to start with our synopsis, splitting it into three parts. We're going to start with Mr. Scott Reed.
All right. Well, in honor of our reading of this book, I just want to point out that I'm having a green tea with jalab syrup, right? And this is a Middle Eastern syrup that actually gets added. It's made from carob, dates, grape molasses, and rose water. So Whoa. It's actually So wow. I'm getting in the mood with my drink here. But
well, how appropriate,
right? And of course, just to pull back the curtain, all this synopsis is courtesy of Mr. Mike Atchison. So Shad and I didn't have to do any heavy lifting on this other than read the book. So
that was pretty heavy, though.
Yeah, that was very heavy. So, all right, here we go. So in the American-controlled Green Zone in February 2004, a body of a murdered Iraqi policeman in training is discovered. The main characters in the story are Christopher Henry, a former cop who came to Iraq to train their security force. It was his trainee that was murdered, and he feels compelled to find the killer. He needs help, so he contacts, Safia al-Akini, Sophia is how she's known, and as is pointed out, mispronounced throughout the book, the daughter of an assassinated Saddam Hussein loyalist, and now on the Iraqi governing council. To help investigate, she puts him in touch with Nasir, a former Baghdad police investigator with a reputation as an excellent interrogator. Chris and Nasir pick up the body of his recruit, Ali al-Fahar, and while delivering the body to his family, they find them all murdered. Sophia's car is struck by an RPG, and while being treated for her wounds, she learns she was pregnant but has now miscarried. Nasir is kidnapped by a jihadi man named Abu Rahim, who tries to recruit him to his cause against the quote-unquote American invaders. Nasir agrees, but tricked the kidnappers into going to prayers and blasted by Fatima with a shotgun. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but Fatima is his wife?
Yes.
Yes,
okay.
Correct.
Right. And then as a result, and him being Nasir. As a result, Chris puts Nasir and Fatima up at his place for their safety. They all believe that Abu Rahim is behind killing the recruit and the attack on Sophia.
And Chris and Fatima drink vodka all night, which leads to Chris explaining why he came to Iraq. He shows her a secret, a small statue of an ancient god that has been stolen from a museum and given to him. While Sophia tries to get info on Abu Raham, Chris and Nasir are approached by Bob, quote unquote, and his group of NCIS agents, and they intend to take Nasir away with them because they suspect he is in league with Abu Rahim. When Fatima intervenes, they think that she has a gun and kills her on sight. Nasir is tortured by Bob, and Sophia meets with Hassan's. I don't know why I stumbled on that. Hassan's American connection, Franklin, in hopes of finding out who is behind everything. Franklin rescues Nasir from the CIA, and Sophia baits Abu Rahim into meeting her at her home so she can turn him over to Nasir, or turn Nasir over to him. The pompous and clueless Jim from Ops, who wanted to congratulate them for setting up the capture of Abu Rahim.
Okay, did we want to talk about like each section? You know, because I had one comment like on the first part of this.
Yeah,
I just want to back up just a little bit. Now, when I read this, I got the impression, I don't think it was explicitly stated, I don't know that it was even implied, but I almost felt like that Chris Henry was the father to the child that Sophia lost. Did you?
Without a doubt. That was actually, yeah.
Okay.
That was, in my longer synopsis, that was either that or in my notes. I have it. I think it's very heavily implied. Yeah.
It was in the longer one, because when I read it, I was like, okay, I'm on the same page.
Okay.
Because I thought the same thing too.
Well, when you sent the longer ones, I knew we were going to try for these to be a little bit shorter. I was like, I just kind of said,
Scott
I'm not going to read this. I'm not going to read
synopsis.
I didn't read the long one. I'm just going to go with the short one here. So I just thought that it's like, they didn't really come back to that, but they kind of had this implication of a relationship,
right?
And they never really got into details about how deep the relationship was. But I also felt that was actually kind of implied as well. So.
Yeah, and we can continue on if anybody else has comments. I've got a couple comments about that first third of the book.
Yeah, go ahead.
Of course, this being the first covered book for this spin-off series, I really delved deep into this, and maybe it's because it's a Tom King book too, but it's so steeped in actual geography and history and the reality of the the war in Iraq. One thing that I thought was really visually striking was the crossed swords of that were in that very first scene where the body was found. It's called the Victory Arch, and it's sort of a war memorial to the Iran-Iraq war from the 70s. So you don't have there's really no mistaking where you are and when you're there. There's a lot of, you get this whole feeling of chaos. It's kind of like organized chaos. Even the Americans, our presence there is sort of tenuous. You're trying to work with the new government, and I thought King did a really good job of setting that up.
The story is obviously fictional, but the location is very grounded.
Yeah, and not just the pregnancy. What you said, Scott, about the implication of it being Chris's. There were other things too that they had rendezvoused before, that they had a personal relationship. I can't remember. I can't really cite exactly what issue that was in, but and also I just on the front end here, this is a very graphic book, but it's not like Quentin Tarantino. It's more like, I think I put my notes. This is like what Sergeant Rock comics would look like without a comics code. If you just really, you get the feel of it, and it's not as glorified as what. You can also see how desensitized the people are that are involved.
Now, one of the things I struggled with, especially through the first third to a half of this book, was I was confused between some of the characters. And as I was reading the book, I especially sometimes even Sophia and Fatima, I had to really stop and think about it, and sometimes back up and reread some sections because I was thinking that was the other character. I don't know if that was just me either reading it too fast or that was a result of the artwork or not enough differentiation. in the characters. I really felt like Fatima should have been a much older represented character, and Sophia probably would have been a younger character. But in the reading, I wasn't, in skimming through it, I wasn't able to pick that up real quick. So I was a little slow on the pickup on that, which, in the long run could have affected how I felt about this book. But I don't know if I was the only one who struggled with the characters or not.
No, you know what, Shad, go ahead. I'm sure.
No, you're fine. I didn't. No, I don't think I did too much. I mean, our main characters. There were probably some side support characters that I wasn't quick on the draw with. I mean, even if it wasn't for Bob saying, "Hi, I'm Bob," every time, or you can call me Bob if you'd like, I would have been like, "Who's this guy again?" But our main players, I felt like I had a decent handle on. But I do feel like there were characters that kind of came and went fairly quickly throughout the story that if you weren't paying attention, that second read, I did not give it a second read, but if you gave it a second read, I definitely feel like I would have picked up on a couple more pieces.
Yeah, I was going to say this is almost you almost have to have a second read to maybe pick up, why there were certain characters and why they did what they did. Actually, I think Franklin was a character that they just needed to move the plot along.
Yeah, I forgot about him until I read the synopsis.
and they some of the other ones, like the governing council, Hassan is he represents the Kurds in the governing council, and I thought that was appropriate. She needed some way to just establish. I don't think we mentioned this yet, but Sophia, or Safia, if you want to say it the Arabic way, she was actually raised in the United States, raised and educated. So she is of Iraqi heritage, and she brings her family name, brings a whole lot of credibility to the governing council. To your point, Scott, about her, maybe she should have been older.
No. Fatima should have been older to make it clear the representation between the two characters. Because whenever you see them, and most of the time they're in headscarves. Yeah. So all you're seeing is their face, and sometimes their face was pretty close to being the same. So no, I'm not.
Okay.
Fatima, I got you. Fatima should have been represented as older. So.
She didn't look as old as maybe
because Nasir didn't look as old as Nasir.
Yeah, right.
But again, that may have been partly because her hair was covered, so it was difficult from a storytelling perspective to differentiate the characters, and from an art perspective to differentiate the characters.
Yeah. And I mean, and at the point in this story that we're at, I mean, plot wise, I was thinking, okay, you got this, she was attacked by an RPG, she being Sophia, and you're like, that's coming out of nowhere. And then all of a sudden they just jump to the conclusion that, okay, this is all behind this Abu Rahim, who was put there as almost a red herring. It still didn't affect negatively, I don't think, the story, because you knew, okay, who we're going to find out's actually behind it. It's just, I wasn't expecting that attack on her and the confusion it led to for them and maybe the readers.
Well, just to tell a story and this was, I had a friend in the Guard who was over probably close to this time frame, maybe a little bit afterwards, but those random acts of violence, that didn't surprise me at all, because this is a guy who was driving in a Humvee, and on the equivalent of their interstate system, he just had somebody come off of an on-ramp, slam into the side of the Humvee. Actually, whenever it happened, he actually got thrown into the stick shift. It went up underneath his body armor. He actually had an emergency appendectomy after this happened. But basically, if they hadn't had jammers in his Humvee, there was explosives in the car that came in onto the on-ramp.
Oh,
right,
wow.
It would have blown up his vehicle. So fortunately, the jammers is what actually kind of ultimately saved his life. But when I'm seeing that scene, that didn't seem something like too terribly out of the ordinary. And when you kind of think about the Sunni versus Shia versus Kurd thing that's happening, those random acts of violence against one of the other factions, didn't seem out of place or even shocking to me.
Right.
But I guess that's a matter of perspective.
Yeah, I don't think it wasn't like I thought that was out of place. I just didn't expect her to get attacked at that point in the story, but I see why, knowing what I know now, why that was done, so you could build that intrigue. I know that we kind of both of you done your synopsis, and there's still a few comments that that kind of go with the first 2/3 of the book that I was going to bring up. I thought it was kind of funny. The reason that probably both Fatima or Fatima, that's how I was pronouncing it in my head, why she and Chris went outside was because of Nasir's snoring. So
yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, I could see that happening. I mean, I've been on hunting trips before with guys. I'm like, okay, I'd rather sleep outside. But that was my favorite chapter of the whole book, was the dialogue, but that between those two characters, and not just that they were getting more loose lipped because they were drinking vodka, but it starts pulling just slowly, progressively. You can see more and more of their motivations. We learn more that why Chris came over there. He was the San Diego cop, or a San Diego cop that, he had actually pulled over or something, one of the future 9/11 attackers, but there wasn't enough to hold him, so he let him go. And then when 9/11 happened, his guilt kind of led him to, he's got to do something to ease his guilt. What'd you think of that? Did you that resonate at all?
It was an interesting backstory point, but I don't think it made a big difference in the story overall.
Yeah.
So, because ultimately, when it all gets down to it, he kind of was just like this. Ultimately, seemed like a disinterested guy who was just there to make a buck,
Yeah,
and even though he had that as the story motivation, and maybe that was his outward portrayal versus an inward motivation, but it didn't have that really. It's almost like it was just more, why he was so depressed, because he could have done more, as opposed to having it being a motivation for it.
If you're looking at, if King's looking at, it's going to be an 8, a 10, or a 12 issue series, this is one of those things that he can just do in his sleep, right? A dialogue, a book that's nothing but dialogue,
right?
And so
I did like the growth of. I really liked Fatima's, just as a character. She was probably one of my favorites, especially after Nasir got captured, and then she was waiting there to just beat those guys. You kind of knew that she was she wasn't going to take anything from anybody kind of person, and comes off in an unassuming way originally, and then it's a bummer that her demise is where it is and how it happens and everything, but is a very big turning point for the story. I think if I remember right, it is the end of the first volume, is it not?
It was issue 6.
Yeah.
And I agree. This was like the heart-wrenching issue where it was, the previous one was like, oh, he builds up your affection or attachment to the character. And you already kind of knew she was capable of a lot, because when Nasser was kidnapped by Abu and his guys, and when they're taking him back, he says, hey, let's go to the mosque for prayers. And she's actually laying and waiting, and she blows him away with a shot. I'm like, okay, that's a wife that you can count on. But both her death and the stupidity of Bob and his crew, you can look. I've worked in law enforcement my whole life, albeit it being in corrections, and I've seen reactions of people that they jump to conclusion, and that can sometimes lead to really bad things. And then the absurdity. I don't know if you noticed, but he's wearing. Nasser, that is, he's wearing one of Chris's SDPD tank tops, and whenever he falls to his knees in horror when she's shot. It really got to me as an issue. And even Sophia's kind of unwittingly culpable, because she's the one that actually linked Nasser to Abu Rahim, and the Americans are thinking, well, okay, we need to pull him in and see what he's in. When Abu, he was seen taken by the guy, but he didn't really agree to help this guy, this Abu Rahim. So, any other comments? Well, we're halfway through. Any other before we start the last third?
Other than you said we're halfway through and we start in the last third.
We're
80% halfway. Is half minute.
Well, my screen is split. I'm looking at I'm looking at the issue by issue breakdown for each, comments for each issue. We are halfway through that, but we are 2/3 through the synopsis. So yeah, I can be right. I can be both right and wrong. So, and I guess this does kind of fall into the first 2/3 of the synopsis. But when Nasir's being tortured, the callousness of that group, I think Garrett's art was really spectacular during all of that. I don't know if you noticed, but that title of that issue was from Dr. Seuss: One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. I don't know why I picked up on that, but I know one of my kids has had that book before. And then one last thought I have, and then I'll shut up. Whenever they first released these in 2 individual trade paperbacks, the first one was called Bang Bang Bang. The second one was called Pow Pow Pow. And as you guys know, that was sort of a theme, visually and onomatopoeia in that regard, of the 2 halves of this overall story. That it was, I remember reading somewhere that the original lettering was not what Garrett's wanted, or maybe King what he wanted, and they changed it to more of that typeset Courier New font or something. But I thought that was pretty interesting. I liked that part of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, shall we finish up with the last third?
Roller.
All right. The Abu Rahim sting unfolds with Chris and Bob in the waiting room, and we learn that Chris's now dead trainee, Ali Al-Fahar, was actually an informant for Bob, because Ali gave bad information that led to the assault on a Christian household, killing a little boy. Bob purposely got Ali killed by dropping him off in a Sunni neighborhood known to be thick with jihadists, and handed him cash, making the appearance of payment for information in front of a bunch of these fundamentalist or jihadist witnesses. Abu shows up at Sophia's place wearing a suicide vest, demanding her cooperation in his cause because he knows she has clout. Sophia learns that it was not Abu that actually attacked her car with the RPG after all. They realize Abu was bluffing about the bomb, and in comes the attack team, and they killed Abu. Back to training the recruits, Chris runs into Jim from Ops and persuades Jim to go on a ride with him. Sophia and Nasir meet Chris there, and even though Jim from Ops convinces them he is just a front man, not an intelligence chief, not behind all of this, Nasir puts a bullet through his head anyway, saying, quote, "I believe you, but you are the one who is here," unquote. The last scene brings us to full circle, and they leave Jim's body under the Victory Arch parade ground. And that's our synopsis. So got some comments about the last third, if you have any.
Well, my only comment is I really feel like, and I don't know, maybe there's just me being an American, right? But like pretty much all of the Americans in this story are portrayed very negatively. And I guess that kind of, even Chris was like a didn't care type of an attitude, and he was the closest thing to being a positive American character in this story, right? And having known people who were over there, and some of their motivations, that kind of left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. I would have liked to have seen somebody with a little bit more, positive outlook or positive spin, or at least, that seemed to be there trying to help and do the right thing. Right. Yeah. So that part of it bothered me a little bit. That's basically all I wanted to say about it. But
yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think it sort of was a out of balance representation of Americans there. I think we were the devil you knew or the devil you didn't know. I think that was some of the theme in the book, is that when Hassan was speaking in one of those issues about, how to deal with the Americans, they needed us. But yeah, I think most of what you're talking about is probably King's personal perspective on that war.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but I don't disagree. It felt a little heavy on that end, and Chris, it could have been a little bit more morally. You could have been more people like Chris. Even, I think back to that morgue scene, a couple different scenes, and those 2 soldiers in there were so dismissive and callous and treating the bodies and just very flippant about it all. And you're thinking, well, I don't know if that was, maybe it was somewhat like that for some of them, but surely not everybody.
Yeah.
Shad, do you have any
Yeah, it's one of those things where I agree. It's definitely the recount of one man's journey on that side of things and how he felt about it afterwards. Seems as though it definitely focused more on the decisions and how the power kind of is in that situation is where the main focus of frustration probably, I would assume, from Tom King's point of view is how decisions are made and why they're made seems a little off, and probably I would imagine is pretty accurate to at least that situation specifically.
Yeah.
But this back half of the story felt like there was a lot of vagueness in most of this back third, where it just kind of it felt like it needed to be all the Scooby-Doo mystery clues lining up, but they didn't quite get spelled out in a way that was super well done. But that's kind of a Tom King way to do things, is how do we leave it kind of vague and everything. And then the last issue is just like fast forward, I don't know how long it was, and then it was just like boom, here's all this stuff, and we're going to close it up with us punishing Jim from Ops. Which was kind of like, oh, okay, well, I guess that you had to finish it, so here we go.
Yeah, I mean, I have a thought on that a little bit, but it's a couple things earlier I want to talk about. First of all, it's a positive thing about Garrett's attention to detail. There was a scene when Abu and Sophia, of course, Nasir's there too, and they're sitting there kind of debating things and talking, and she stands up, she's mad about something, and she knocks over her teacup. And in the next panel, you see Nasir putting that teacup back upright, just picking it up. And you just don't get many artists that really do something like that. There were, in that same issue, there was, do you remember seeing that panel where the woman, it was like whenever they were getting ready to go in and kill Abu, a woman runs past Chris and Bob, and they're checking her out because she's in high heels. And I'm thinking, what is she doing? I mean, we're in the war zone and she's running in high heels. I just thought that was kind of off. But now, what you're saying about Jim, I'm like, again, the ambiguity is kind of a Tom King theme. I still don't know for sure whether he really was or wasn't their boss.
Right.
Yeah. So they. Even Nasir was like, well, it doesn't matter anyway. You're the one that's here. That's just, I don't know how I feel about that, but
it's almost like they're saying, if you've indiscriminately killed my wife, I'm going to indiscriminately kill an American.
That's an excellent way to put it. That's that's an excellent way to I haven't thought of it like that. So, it's, this is the sort of the payoff of a story that Nasir told Chris way back in one of the first issues when the Americans needed a culprit for some atrocity. The local sheik would just pick someone that appeared to be the scapegoat, making that primary that problem to go away was the primary concern. Justice was just an afterthought. Now Chris kind of walks in the shoes of that sheik. This is serious non-superhero comics, I think, at its best. And I think I read somewhere where they framed the genre as war noir, which is pretty apt, I think. And did you think at any point that Christopher Henry was the sheriff of Babylon? Or do you think that he is?
I never thought about who the title character was supposed to be. I never really considered it from that perspective. I never really thought about who the sheriff of Babylon was. So no, I haven't given that any thought.
I think it's actually Nasir. I think he's the.
And I would agree with that now if you're asking. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know why I thought about it after I completely read the book, and I'm looking at the title. I'm like, well, who is the sheriff? I mean, they're looking for a sheriff. That's one of the things Chris was wanting whenever he had this body of his recruit. They're like, well, who are the police? Who do we go to? And they're like, oh, well, not us. Oh, no, not us. And so
based on that, what you're just saying, it's either Nasir or it's nobody.
Right.
There
right.
is
Right.
Yeah.
So, you guys ready to do an overall rating, or do you have any more thoughts on it?
I'm good to rate.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll start because I'm going to be the low man.
Okay.
So, and this kind of goes back to kind of a similar discussion that we had on public domain.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to read about something real life, I would probably be better served reading a real story of events that actually happened during this time period. So it's not that it's not well written. It's not that it's not well drawn. It's not something that I want to come back to.
Yes.
Right. And so I'm going to give it that 6.0 fine grade because I guess if there's somebody who is into war comics and doesn't want to read superheroes, it's something that I could probably recommend to them, but it's going to be on the low side of that recommendation for me.
Okay, fair enough. How about you, Shad?
I don't know if I could have said it any better than Scott, and my rating is exactly the same, 6.0, fine. It's a little too based in reality for my fiction that I like. I agree completely, and I agree. No slight against the writer, no slight against the artist, because it was all fantastic. The pacing could have been maybe a little bit better for me, but other than that, it just isn't something that I would find myself choosing to read normally at any given point. So I would agree with that.
Oh, yeah. Totally. I definitely recognize you guys' perspectives on this. And actually, hearing you talk about it almost maybe draws my rating down just a little bit. I would probably go a 7.5, a very fine minus. It's not something, like you said, Chad, it's not something I could read over and over. I mean, that would be depressing, really. And I don't know that King's strengths are really in sequential or in I'm sorry, not sequential, but long stretches of issues, the long form storytelling. I don't know if this is collected. I think the work that went into it, the quality of the work is top notch, but it's not necessarily for everyone, and that's okay. So 7.5, very fine minus.
Two things, just to I don't think we mentioned John Paul Leon covers. Did you mention that?
Yeah, in the introduction I did.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right. And then I think it was, at least I think I remember hearing this from Peter David. And when you go into things like this, you have that willing suspension of disbelief, right? That you have to kind of set aside so that you can enjoy something superhero-ish. Well, you don't have to set aside anything because all this stuff could and then probably not in such a condensed story, but in real life, probably all these are real events that actually happened that Tom King was aware of, and he pulled them together into a single story. And because of that, and I think Chad pointed out that it just seemed a little bit too real.
Yeah. That's we don't always read these because a lot of times we just read to get for escapism, and
absolutely
this one does the opposite. So, but at the same time, I'm so impressed with the quality and the work that he can do, and the characterizations. I think even if they weren't the characters, like you said, Scott, about Chris being, and maybe some of the other ones could have been a little bit more portrayed a little more positively.
At least one.
At least one.
Yeah. At least one.
Yeah. Overall, though, you can see the backstory of each character really really clearly. So, all right.
Yeah, the character I liked the most was Nasir.
I agreed, and he's the guy that mercilessly, he didn't really want to do it. His wife was probably more callous than him, and she's like, "Go get it done," And he basically had revenge on the 2 or 3 CIA agents that were in his basement that he thought maybe were responsible for his daughter's death. So anyway, I'm hoping the next episode we have a book that's a more cheerful and happy, and I have to remember what it'll be. But anyway, first I want to thank Mike Noe. He's the owner of Muddy Monster Comics for letting me do the interview with him. I encourage you all that are listening to stop into that shop if you're in the area. These episodes will come out hopefully every 2 to 3 months. Just kind of depends on my travel schedule, and just my overall time capacity. And also thanks to Scott and Shad for helping me out on this first episode. I got to tell you, I've done a little blurb of some recording by myself, and it goes a lot better when you got people to bounce your thoughts off of, actual pictures of you there. So maybe I'll ever do it by myself. I'll just have some pictures of you guys.
That's right.
Yeah. It's all right. Well, all right. So like we usually do, I'll let you guys give your how to contact you. Scott, what's your contact information?
So Scott Reed, you can reach me at burgcomics.com, BURG comics.com, and there you'll find links to my Facebook, social media, eBay page, email address, all of the stuff so you can track down things that I have available for sale or ask questions.
And you can find me, Shad Schubert, on Facebook. That's SHAADSCHUBERT.
All right. And I'm Mike Atchison at the old-fashioned email, m.atchison90@gmail.com, or Twitter at Mike Atchison5. So thanks, and we'll talk to you next time.
Well, I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Comic books in my hands, man.